The Montana sun hung low, painting the sky in hues of amber and rose, as Clara swung her axe with steady precision. Each strike against the pine log sent a satisfying thunk echoing through the valley, a rhythm that matched the beat of her determined heart. She was building her cabin, one log at a time, on a patch of land she'd claimed with her savings after leaving the city behind. At 32, Clara had grown tired of the noise, the crowds, and the expectations that came with a life she no longer wanted. Out here, in the wild embrace of the Bitterroot Mountains, she was free to carve out a new beginning. She paused to wipe sweat from her brow, her calloused hands gripping the axe handle. The stack of notched logs beside her was growing, but the work was slow. She didn't mind. Each log was a step toward something solid, something hers. She adjusted her wide-brimmed hat and glanced toward the horizon, where the silhouette of a rider appeared against the fading light. Elijah rode slowly, his horse's hooves kicking up soft clouds of dust along the trail. A widower at 40, he carried the weight of loss in his quiet demeanor. His wife, Sarah, had passed 3 years ago, leaving him and their ranch without the warmth of her laughter or the promise of the family they'd dreamed of. Since then, Elijah had kept to himself, tending to his cattle and mending fences, but the loneliness gnawed at him like a winter wind. He'd heard about the woman building a cabin on the edge of his grazing land, and curiosity, or perhaps something deeper, had drawn him to see her for himself. As he approached, Elijah dismounted, tying his horse to a nearby pine. Clara noticed him and straightened, her axe resting on her shoulder. She wasn't afraid, but she was cautious. Strangers out here were rare, and she'd learned to trust her instincts. "Evening," Elijah called, tipping his hat. His voice was low, weathered like the leather of his saddle. "Didn't mean to startle you. I'm Elijah Kane, your neighbor to the west." Clara studied him, noting the lines etched around his eyes and the way his broad shoulders seemed to carry an unspoken burden. "Clara Thornton," she replied, lowering her axe but keeping her stance firm. "What brings you out here?" "Saw the smoke from your fire last night," he said, nodding toward the small campfire she'd built nearby. "Figured I'd see who's settling in. Not many folks build their own cabin these days." "Not many folks want to," she said, a hint of a smile tugging at her lips. "But I do." Elijah's gaze drifted to the pile of logs, each one carefully notched and stacked. "You're doing fine work," he said, and there was genuine admiration in his tone. "Need a hand?" Clara hesitated. She'd come out here to prove she could do this alone, to build something without relying on anyone else. But there was something about Elijah's quiet offer, free of pity or presumption, that made her reconsider. "Maybe tomorrow," she said finally. "I'm calling it a day." He nodded, as if understanding her need for independence. "Fair enough. I'll stop by in the morning, if that's all right." She gave a small nod, and he mounted his horse, tipping his hat once more before riding off into the dusk. The next morning, Elijah returned, true to his word, with a sack of tools slung over his shoulder and a thermos of coffee. Clara was already at work, her breath visible in the crisp mountain air. She glanced up, surprised but not displeased to see him. "Thought you might like some coffee," he said, setting the thermos on a stump. "And I brought an extra saw. 2 hands make lighter work." Clara poured herself a cup, the warmth seeping through her gloves. "You're persistent," she said, but there was no edge to her words. "Comes with the territory," he replied, a faint smile breaking through his reserved exterior. "Out here, folks help each other. Doesn't mean you owe me anything." They worked side by side that day, falling into an easy rhythm. Elijah was skilled, his hands steady as he measured and cut, but he didn't overstep. He let Clara lead, offering suggestions only when asked. As the sun climbed higher, they talked, small things at first, about the land, the weather, the best way to fit a log. But over the hours, their conversation deepened. Clara learned that Elijah had been born on the ranch he now ran, that he'd loved Sarah since they were teenagers, and that her death from fever had left a hole he hadn't known how to fill. Elijah, in turn, learned that Clara had been a schoolteacher in Chicago, that she'd left behind a fiancé who wanted her to be someone she wasn't, and that she'd come to Montana to find a life that felt true. "You're brave," Elijah said as they paused for lunch, sharing bread and cheese by the fire. "Not many would start over like this." Clara shrugged, staring into the flames. "Brave or stubborn? Sometimes I'm not sure which." "Bit of both, I reckon," he said, and she laughed, the sound bright against the quiet of the valley. Weeks passed, and Elijah became a regular presence at Clara's build site. He never pushed, never stayed longer than she welcomed, but his quiet reliability became a cornerstone of her days. They raised walls together, fitted a roof, and chinked the gaps with moss and clay. The cabin took shape, a testament to Clara's determination and Elijah's unspoken support. One evening, as they sat by the fire, Clara noticed Elijah staring at the stars. His face was softer in the firelight, the lines of grief less pronounced. "What are you thinking about?" she asked. That he was quiet for a moment, then said, "Sarah used to love the stars. Said they reminded her we're part of something bigger." He paused, his voice catching. "I haven't looked at them much since she's been gone." Clara felt a pang in her chest, not jealousy but a shared understanding of loss. She'd left her old life behind, but it hadn't been without pain. "I used to look at the stars in Chicago," she said. "Couldn't see many. Not with the city lights. Out here, it's like they're close enough to touch." Elijah turned to her, his eyes searching. "What made you choose this place, Clara? This life?" She thought for a moment, her hands wrapped around a tin mug. "I wanted something real. Something I could build with my own hands. I was tired of living for other people's expectations." He nodded, as if her words resonated deep within him. "I've been holding on to the ranch for Sarah's memory," he admitted. "But sometimes I wonder if I'm just stuck." Clara reached out, her hand resting lightly on his arm. "You're not stuck, Elijah. You're here, helping me build this cabin. That's not a man who's given up." Their eyes met, and for a moment, the world seemed to hold its breath. Then Elijah looked away, clearing his throat. "We'd best get some rest. Big day tomorrow." As winter approached, the cabin neared completion. Clara moved in, though the interior was still sparse. Just a cot, a table, and a wood stove Elijah had helped install. He brought her a quilt his mother had made, insisting she'd need it for the cold nights. Clara accepted it with a warmth in her chest she hadn't felt in years. One snowy afternoon, Elijah arrived with a small pine tree slung across his horse. "Thought you might like a Christmas tree," he said, his breath clouding in the air. Clara's eyes lit up. "I haven't had one since I was a kid." They set it up in the corner of the cabin, decorating it with bits of ribbon and pine cones. As they worked, Elijah told her stories of his childhood Christmases, of Sarah's love for carols, and Clara shared memories of her father teaching her to whittle by the fire. The cabin, once empty, felt alive with their laughter. That night, as they sat by the stove, Elijah grew quiet. "Clara," he said finally, his voice low. "I've been meaning to say. I'm glad you came here. This valley's been lonesome, but with you, it feels different." Clara's heart skipped a beat. She'd felt it too, the way his presence had become a comfort, a joy she hadn't expected. But she was afraid, not of him, but of what it meant to let someone in again. "Elijah," she said softly, "I came here to be on my own. I didn't plan on this." He nodded, his eyes steady. "I know. And I'd never ask you to be anything but yourself. But I'd be lying if I said I didn't care for you, Clara. More than I thought I could again." The words hung between them, heavy with possibility. Clara looked at him, at the man who'd stood by her through every log, every doubt, every triumph. She thought of the life she'd wanted, independent, strong, her own. And she realized that sharing it with someone like Elijah didn't mean giving that up. "I care for you too," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "But I need time." He smiled, a quiet, patient smile. "I've got plenty of that." Spring came, and with it, new life. Clara planted a garden behind her cabin, and Elijah brought her seeds from his own stores. They worked together. Not just on the cabin now, but on the land, their lives weaving together like the roots beneath the soil. Elijah began to talk of the future, not just his ranch, but a family, a dream he'd thought died with Sarah. Clara listened, her heart opening to the possibility. One evening, as they sat on the porch of her finished cabin, watching the sun dip below the mountains, Clara took Elijah's hand. "I've been thinking," she said. "About what you said. About us." He turned to her, hope flickering in his eyes. "And? I want to build something with you," she said, her voice steady. "Not just a cabin, but a life. Together." Elijah's face broke into a smile, the kind that reached his eyes and smoothed the lines of grief. He pulled her close, and for the first time in years, he felt whole. Years later, the valley was no longer just Clara's or Elijah's, but theirs. The cabin stood strong, joined by a barn and a small house where their children. Two girls with Clara's fire and Elijah's quiet strength, ran through the grass. Each log of that first cabin held a story, a memory of two people who found each other in the wilderness, building not just a home, but a family, one moment at a time.